Hi, boys and girls. It's time for Tuesday Tales. And as always, I have to start with a joke. Since today's theme is Little Red Riding Hood, I have a special Little Red Riding Hood joke for you. What did Little Red Riding Hood say when she saw the big bad wolf? She said, "There's the big bad wolf." Get it? No. Okay, it's all right. They're not all winners. Before we get into the books, I'd like to talk to you for just 1 minute about what Red Riding Hood stories usually sound like. Let's see. Little Red starts off wanting to go to Grandma's house and bring her something to eat because Grandma isn't feeling well. So her mom puts her red cloak on. That's how she gets her nickname, Little Red Riding Hood. She's always wearing that little red cloak. And gives her a basket and tells her not to talk to any strangers in the forest and not to stray from the path. Little Red Riding Hood starts skipping down the path, and there is a sneaky wolf there, and he tricks her into stopping to pick some flowers. And while she's doing that, he runs off to Grandma's house and gobbles her up. He puts on Grandma's nightgown and glasses and bed cap, and he gets under the covers. And when Little Red Riding Hood comes in and notices something very strange with Grandma, and she says the whole thing about how big your eyes are, the better to see you with, how big your teeth are, the better to eat you with. And just then a woodcutter comes in, chops the wolf, out comes Grandma, and they all live happily ever after. That's the regular way of telling Little Red Riding Hood. Today's stories are a little bit different. The first one is called Very Little Red Riding Hood, and it's by, I want to open it up because their full names are on the cover, Teresa Heapy and Sue Heap. What are the chances of two friends having almost the same last name? Published by Houghton Mifflin. Now, she's very Little Red Riding Hood, and you'll see she is very little. Very Little Red Riding Hood was going to her grandmama's for a sleepover. "I go see Grandma with cakes," said Very Little Red Riding Hood. "Yes, my love, I know," said her mother. "Off you go. Be gentle with Grandmama and don't break anything." "Bye-bye, my mummy," said Very Little Red Riding Hood. So, Very Little Red Riding Hood set off for Grandmama's house. She hadn't gone very far when she met a wolf. "A foxy," said Very Little Red Riding Hood, and she gave him a big hug. Wow, I don't know who's more surprised, me or the big bad wolf. "Aren't you scared?" asked the wolf. "I'm not scared. I, Very Little Red Riding Hood, that's what I am," said Very Little Red Riding Hood. "I go see Grandma with cakes," said Very Little Red Riding Hood. "Oh, good," said the wolf. "Can I have one?" "No," said Very Little Red Riding Hood. "No, touch the cakes." The wolf tried again. "Can I come too?" "No," shouted Very Little Red Riding Hood. "Go away." The wolf tried once more. "Look at these lovely flowers," he said. "We could pick some for Grandmama." "No," screamed Very Little Red Riding Hood. "Not little flowers, red." Oh boy, she really is acting little, isn't she? So they picked some red flowers. "Come on, Foxy," said Very Little Red Riding Hood. "We go this way. Chase me." So the wolf had to chase Very Little Red Riding Hood all the way to Grandma's house. Look, he's chasing her everywhere. He's getting exhausted. But because she's a toddler, she can run all day. Very Little Red Riding Hood knocked on Grandmama's door. "I come see you, Grandma. Look, cakes," she said. "Well, it's lovely to see you, dear," said Grandmama. And then, "Help! There's a wolf on the doorstep." come for sleepover, said very Little Red Riding Hood firmly. I got my bag and red teddy and my cups and my blanket. Foxy, you want a cup of tea? He can't come in, said Grandmama. Oh, Grandma, it's only Foxy, said very Little Red Riding Hood. I think Grandma's got the right idea. She doesn't know him at all. He could be a big bad wolf. But the wolf came in and took a cup of tea from very Little Red Riding Hood. They all had a cup of tea. Then they played hide and seek. Then they did some dancing. Oh, it looks like Grandma's getting to know the wolf. Then they did drawing. Then they had another cup of tea and another. The wolf and Grandmama were getting quite tired. But then very Little Red Riding Hood remembered something. Or somebody. I don't know where my mommy is, said very Little Red Riding Hood. I want my mommy. Oh, she is very little. Very Little Red Riding Hood was very upset. Grandma tried a story. She tried a hug. She tried Red Teddy. Mr. Wolf, we're in trouble, she said. Can you help? Look at very Little Red Riding Hood is crying so hard. Grandma hasn't been able to help, and now the wolf is really worried too. So the wolf tried. Oh, what big wet eyes you have, he said. Oh, and what a big snotty nose you have, he said. And then, oh, what a big red mouth you have, said the wolf. And I'm going to... What's he going to do? Give you a great big tickle! So the wolf tickled very Little Red Riding Hood. He tickled her arms and her ribs and her toes. He tickled her chin and her ears and her nose. Very Little Red Riding Hood stopped crying. She laughed. She laughed and laughed and laughed, and then she fell asleep. And they all slept happily ever after. Oh, she was so little. What a big day for very Little Red Riding Hood. Our next story is called The Great Gran Plan, and it's written by Elli Woodlard and illustrated by Steven Lenton, and it is published by Godwin Books. Now, there are some characters in here that the Big Bad Wolf knows from other stories, so don't be surprised if it's not just Red Riding Hood. The pig had a house in Wild Wild Wood. It was safe, it was strong, it was snug, it was good. Remember him from the story of Three Pigs? So when the bad wolf started howling and prowling and skulking and scowling and grizzling and growling, the pig said, "Old wolf, you can blow till you're blue, but you're not going to break my house down whatever you do." The wolf simply glared, then slunk slowly away. But there on the pathway the very next day, the pig found a note that said, "Top secret plot. Eat 3 little pigs," crossed off. "Gobble Red Riding Hood's gran nice and hot." He caught the wolf's plan. The wolf's plan, since he couldn't get to the pigs, was to eat Grandma from Little Red Riding Hood. Oh no! "No," cried the pig. "Oh, my trusty old trotter, that stinky old flea bag, that wily old rotter." And he leaped to the wheel of his rusty old van, crying, "Pig to the rescue, save that Gran! I'll snatch him, I'll catch him, that wolf can't escape. But first what I need is a super pig cape." So he dashed through the town till he came to a stall. They hadn't a cape, but they gave him a shawl. Then he leaped to the wheel of his rusty old van, crying, "Pig to the rescue, save that Gran!" Uh-oh, he's going to another house here, and I see a little girl with blonde curls, and I see a big bear, and a medium-sized bear, and a baby bear. Now I'll have to be sneaky. I might have to spy. Binoculars, yes, I should give them a try. So he dashed to the shop, and there weren't any there, but he did find some rather fine specs, the last pair. Then he leaped to the wheel of his rusty old van, crying, "Pig to the rescue! Save that Gran! I'll swoop on that wolfie, I'll hoop 'em, I hope, but now what I need is some lovely strong rope." So he dashed to the city. The shops were so full, and the rope was sold out. But he did find some wool. Then he ran to the wheel of his rusty old van, crying, "Pig to the rescue! Save that Gran!" That's Baba Black Sheep, making the wool into yarn. But just as he came to the edge of the wood, he stopped most abruptly, as there the wolf stood. "Red Riding Hood's granny, well, how do you do? Strangely enough, I've been searching for you, although I admit that it's quite a surprise. You've such a strange nose and such small piggy eyes." You see, instead of having a cape, they gave him a shawl, and then he bought some glasses, and he's got a basket of yarn. He almost looks like a grandma. Gran thought the pig, and he took a long look. Then he quivered and quaked, and he shivered and shook. The wolf eyed him up and snarled, "Nice and plump, not old and not chewy. Just look at that rump. You'd taste rather rare in a roll, I would bet." And he lunged at the pig, but then down came a net. He's trapped in the net. And there in the wood was Red Riding Hood's Gram, who cried, "Think we can't catch you? Ha! You bet that we can! You wicked old wolf, you may huff, you may puff, but I'm telling you now, I have had quite enough." Then she tied up the wolf from his nose to his tail, and together they took him and dropped him in jail. "Thanks," cried the pig, but the Gran said, "No, thank you. That wolf would have minced me up for great granny stew." And linking together, they danced out a jig, the wolf busting Gran and the clever young pig. Yes, they both said, "We're an excellent team." And the wolf never came there again, it would seem. Look at everyone's living happily ever after. Rapunzel's doing her hair. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Goldilocks and Baby Bear are making a mess out of the cake. And Cinderella has lost her slipper. There are witches flying in the air. The Frog Prince is over here. But you know what my favorite thing is in this picture? I see a wolf in Red Riding Hood's outfit with a basket, and he's going, "Shh, like don't tell, but I'm up to no good." Uh-oh, I think the big bad wolf has more dastardly plans. Hopefully Great Gran and that pig can outfox him. In your bag today, there were 2 different papers. One was already colored in, and it says finger puppets on top. And these are the characters and things that happened in the very little Red Riding Hood. She was so little. She was no more than a baby, really. The other one are finger puppets to make for the traditional story of Red Riding Hood, with Red Riding Hood, Grandma, the big bad wolf, and the woodcutter, and an extra costume change on top for you know who? Yeah, the big bad wolf, because he hides in the bed wearing Granny's outfit, so that's his disguise. So all you need today are scissors and crayons. So if you take scissors and you cut out all the little finger puppets, you can wear them on your fingers and tell a story, or you can do what I've done and set them up and then you can move them around and play act the story, or make up your own story about what happens to the very, very little Red Riding Hood, her very tired grandma, and her very patient friend that she called Foxy. He was the big bad wolf, but he wasn't so bad. Then you can take the other paper. Now I've colored and cut out Red Riding Hood, and I cut where the circles are. That way I can put them on my fingers and make finger puppets. Da-da, 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 da-da. So what you're going to do is the same thing. Color your characters in. It's easier to color them while they're still on the paper. It's harder to color it after you've cut them out. So all you have to do is take your crayons or markers and you color. Then you cut on the outside line. Then you cut. It'd probably be helpful if mom or dad or a big brother, sister, or babysitter helped with this part. You cut the holes out of the middle where you put your fingers, and then you can walk the characters around and act out your own little Red Riding Hood story. I'm glad you shared this time with me today, boys and girls, talking about Little Red Riding Hood and the big bad wolf and her poor patient grandma. I will see you next week at the same time when our stories will be about pumpkins. See you then.